Chapter
Julian's Hideaway.
By day, St. Oswald's chapel looked less threatening. Light trickled through the narrow leaded panes, shattered itself on dust motes, and settled on the pews like a thin layer of ash. It was still cold, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the silence. Not the tense evening kind, but the morning version that pretended to be peace.
Rose knelt at the front, no longer feeling her numb legs. The coarse brush scraped across the stone without much conviction. Wilson had locked her in with a bucket, a handful of rags, and an order to scrub the floor properly.
"Some places in this school need airing out, Miss Hartley. See that you don't miss any corners."
The headmaster's words from his office came back to her now as she scrubbed the steps leading up to the altar. Then they had sounded like a metaphor. Now, with the smell of detergent water and stale wood in her nose, they sounded more like instructions.
She lifted her gaze to the altar. Stone, solid, unmoving. In front of it, a wooden platform where generations had knelt, leaving knee dents and scuffed marks in the grain. Rose ran the brush along its edge and felt a faint resistance.
She stopped. She ran the brush again, slower this time. Something grated. Not stone, not grit. Something duller, like wood against wood. She set the brush aside and leaned over the edge, studying the boards. One plank, right up by the altar, was a fraction of a shade different, very slightly less polished by feet, as if for years it hadn't borne quite the same weight.
"See that you don't miss any corners."
She swallowed. Her knees burned as she shuffled closer. She slid her fingernails under the board's edge. At first, nothing. Then, a tiny tremor. The plank wasn't nailed down. It was slotted. A hatch.
"This is stupid," she whispered to herself. "It's going to be a mouse hole, or damp." Even so, she pulled. The wood gave with a soft groan. The platform shuddered under her. The board lifted a few centimeters, revealing a darker rectangle beneath.
The smell that rose out of the space wasn't of rot. It was the smell of old, slightly damp paper, condensed past.
She slid her hand into the gap. Her fingers bumped against something metal, cold, rectangular, its corners rounded from touch, the lid slightly rough. She eased it out. A small case, darkened by time, no keyhole, just a simple clasp. Her heart sped up, her palms slicked at once. "Some places in this school need airing out." Could the headmaster have known? Had he meant it literally? Not as the tidy phrase about sweeping out cobwebs of tradition, but as an order. Open the hiding place no one had touched in, 20 years? More? For a moment, she thought of sliding the case back under the board. She could pretend she'd found nothing. The punishment could end with scrubbing, not prying open someone else's secrets.
But at St. Oswald's, secrets always ended up in a file sooner or later. The only question was whose handwriting they'd be written in.
Rose sat down on the cold stone and set the case on her knees. For a second, she just stared at the clasp.
"Since you've locked me in here anyway," she muttered to the empty chapel and shrugged. The clasp yielded with a quiet click. Something rustled inside. She lifted the lid. On top lay an old train ticket. The paper was yellowed, but the print was still legible. Ipswich, London, Liverpool Street. Date, August 1976. Underneath, a second ticket for the same date, same route.
2 tickets, not 1.
She drew in a sharp breath. Beneath them lay a folded letter. The paper was thinner, stained in places where damp had bled through. The ink had faded, but the writing was still recognizable. On the outside there was no name, only a single word, written carefully. Arthur. Cold ran down her spine, as if someone had tipped a bucket over her head. Arthur. The name from the Polaroids, the letters, the notes in the box, the name that had been appearing in her notebook for weeks, always next to the initial J.
Arthur Whitby.
She sat motionless, fingers clamped so tight on the edge of the lid they went white. Somewhere at the back of her mind, she heard the headmaster again.
See that you don't miss any corners. This wasn't a punishment, it was an assignment. She drew in a breath, counting to 4 the way she did before exams. Then she reached for the letter.
If she was ever going to understand what had happened in 1976, it started here, on the chapel floor, with a case someone had hidden, trusting no one would find it, or that the right person would.
And that person now was her. The ticket paper crackled differently to the letter, thicker, stiffer, the print clear. Rose examined them first, just to give her hands something to do. British Rail. Second class. Ipswich, London, Liverpool Street.
August 1976.
Departure time so early that on ordinary days, St. Oswald's was only just waking up. She picked up the second ticket. Same route, same date, same time. 2 named tickets, but the names themselves had been blurred by damp. Only the initials were visible. J.H. on one, A.W. on the other.
Julian H.
Arthur Whitby. The archive's night terrors rose up sharp. The Polaroid of a boy with a cigarette, labeled Julian. The 1976 letters, saturated with melancholy but not yet despair. And Arthur, sometimes just an A, sometimes spelt out Arthur Whitby. She slid the tickets back into the case. The letter remained. The paper was thinner, almost translucent in places. On the outside, the single Arthur. The lines were straight, careful, the T slightly overdone. The sender's initials, J.H., matched the nearby town they sometimes visited on trips. Rose unfolded the sheet gently, corner to corner, not wanting to tear it. In some lines, the ink had bled into a smudge, but most of the sentences could still be read. She couldn't take it in all at once. Her eyes snagged on fragments that punched the air out of her lungs.
I'm not jumping off anything, Artie.
If I jump, it'll be onto the train, the one we'll leave on together. They call it cowardice, but this is the first time in ages I feel like I'm choosing anything myself.
When you're on the platform, I'll be the idiot with the bag that's too big and the courage that's too small.
I don't care about Cavendish or what goes on to plaques. The only board I care about is the one with departure times. She swallowed and forced herself to read on. The writing thickened, as if Julian had been scribbling faster. If you don't come, I'll know the school won, not us. But just once, I want to give myself the right to think you'll choose me over the marble. They say 2 people in one life is enough, but not if one of them has to be left on the altar. The words blurred. She had to hold the page at arm's length to refocus. Julian wrote like someone planning an escape, awkwardly, theatrically, but with a direction so clear it was hard to mistake it for anything else. There was no date at the top, but the tickets filled in the blank. August 1976, Ipswich to London, 2 seats.
Arthur Whitby was supposed to be on the platform.
Rose thought of the archive files.
Not one mention of tickets, of a plan, of if you don't come. Only the tidy phrase, personal tragedy of pupil J.H., tucked into a paragraph.
Her fingers shook as she flipped to the bottom of the letter.
Julian Hartley.
For a second, she heard nothing. No hiss of pipes in the walls, no wind outside. Her heart stopped. She forgot to breathe.
Hartley. The same name on her own ID, the one the headmaster had spoken in his office as he handed her the punishment schedule, the one that sat next to reported incident in the alcohol file.
The name hit harder than any line in the letter. Hartley didn't mean a funder's plaque. It meant a name in a report after something had gone wrong. At St. Oswald's, a name was a pedigree, and the one Rose carried had felt fractured from the start. Her mother had changed their surname back to her maiden name after her father vanished from their lives, a desperate way to reclaim a piece of a former life Rose knew almost nothing about.
Images crashed together in her mind. The old Polaroid of Arthur from the 80s, looking at the camera with a blend of swagger and certainty. The marble plaque with Whitby alongside a donation amount. The dry, personal tragedy of pupil J.H. in the catalog.
And another scene, the headmaster's office, with Matt being told that if Cavendish went to a Hartley, Whitby stopped being an investment. Arthur must have heard the same script 20 years earlier. Maybe not from this headmaster, but from the same world.
If Arthur had been meant to meet Julian and hadn't.
If Julian had planned to run and ended up dead,
It didn't take much to do the maths. Someone had gone to the head, to Arthur's father, to a master, to someone. Someone had told them when and where Julian would be and who he planned to disappear with. Someone with more to lose over Cavendish than he did.
Someone who saw the name Whitby like a kind of insurance policy.
Matt's uncle.
Cold sweat prickled across Rose's back despite the chapel chill. At St. Oswald's, you didn't need many generations to see the pattern. She slid the tickets back under the letter. This wasn't just an old scandal buried in the archive. It was a map, and her name and Matt's lay over the same points where J.H. and A.W. had been before. And another thought clicked. The headmaster hadn't sent her here just to scrub. He'd sent her as a witness. Someone had to find the case. Someone obsessed with columns, but not yet eaten alive by them. Someone who knew how to read between lines in a report, not just the names on plaques.
Someone who was both a Hartley and emphatically not a Whitby.
Rose folded the letter back along its existing creases. Her hands trembled so badly she almost missed the mouth of the case.
Julian hadn't planned to die. He had planned to run with Arthur Whitby. Someone had ensured that instead of a platform, he got a grave. Now she sat in the same chapel, on the same stone, with the letter in her hands and a ticket that had never been punched.
St. Oswald's loved repeating lessons. The question was whether this time anyone would change the answers.
She didn't know how long she sat there with the case on her knees. The light shifted a few centimeters across the floor. The altar's shadow stretched. Her fingers were stiff from gripping the metal.
The case didn't fit any of her catalog boxes. She didn't know yet whether it belonged under evidence, personal history, or explosive.
Hartley.
Her name in this place sounded like something that shouldn't be said aloud. She jumped, nearly dropping the case.
She looked round. Matt was standing between the pews. His hair was mussed, his breathing uneven.
"I looked for you in the archive," he said, coming forward. "Llewellyn said, If she's not down here, her punishment's probably been extended. I didn't think she meant it literally." He stopped a few steps from the altar, frowning. His eyes checked her face first, only later noticing the case.
Something flickered in his expression.
"What's that?" he asked sharply. Rose's hand landed on the box, reflexively covering it.
"Nothing," she said too quickly. "Old junk, left over from a collection for new candlesticks."
Matt's mouth tightened.
"Of course," he said, "because no one in this school has ever hidden anything under an altar." They stared at each other. He looked away first, but only so he could circle the altar and come closer.
"Rose," he said more quietly, "I've seen the way you look at things with dates and initials. That isn't junk."
She pressed her fingers harder into the metal. It felt like ice.
"Your name isn't on it," she snapped. "Not everything here revolves around the Whitbys."
"Really?" he said dryly. "Because every time you open something from 1976, it seems to."
Her mouth twisted, humorless.
"This time," she said, "it revolves more around the Hartleys."
That stopped him. His brow creased.
"What?" She didn't reply. Instead, she lifted the lid and tilted it towards him so he could see the tickets in the folded letter. Not enough for him to grab them.
"2 tickets," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Ipswich, London, August 1976. J.H. and A.W."
He stared, saying nothing.
"Julian Hartley," she said. "Arthur Whitby." The air thickened.
"Arthur," he repeated. "My uncle."
"Your Polaroid hero," she said. "The one who always stood by the family." His jaw clenched. "And?" he said. "So what?"
It was an escape plan. 2 people, 2 tickets, 1 platform. Julian wrote to your uncle that he wanted to leave with him, that he was done with this place, with Cavendish, plaques, that he chose him over the marble.
Something in his eyes shuddered, like the office door. "The archive's full of letters," he said. "People write all sorts of things when they're desperate."
"You don't buy tickets in advance when you're desperate," she said. "Desperate people head for towers. He went for the station."
They fell quiet. In the chapel, there was only their breathing and the low, steady rush of pipes.
"You know what isn't in any of this?" she asked after a moment. "In the reports, in the neat, personal tragedy of pupil J.H., there's no mention of tickets, no plan, just the comfortable something happened. There's never any Hartley next to truth."
She snapped the lid shut. "You know what there is," she went on. "Whitby, on plaques, committees, scholarships."
Matt's hands balled into fists, his knuckles blanched.
"You're suggesting my uncle—" "What?" he spat. "Pushed him under a train? Turned him in? Is that the story you're writing?"
"I'm suggesting someone knew about those tickets," she said coolly. "Someone with more to lose than Julian. Someone who could go to the head, to his father, to whoever made decisions and say, 'He's going to run with me.'"
She took a step closer.
"And your family has a knack for turning people into investments," she said, "and for choosing stone over flesh." She braced herself for him to explode, to shout that she didn't know his uncle, that she had no right. Instead, Matt seemed to fold inwards. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He looked from altar to platform as if trying to see a boy there from 20 years ago.
"You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "I can't even say that's impossible." He turned away, looking for balance in the empty pews.
"In that house," he went on,
Everything comes down to one question. Does this help the name Whitby, or does it hurt it? If someone in 1976 decided that running off with a boy from the wrong family would hurt, they didn't have to get rid of him physically. They could have called someone, shut a door, shipped him off.
His voice broke on the last word. Rose felt her anger lose some of its drive. This wasn't a boy defending a statue. This was someone whose floor had just slipped 20 years back.
"You've heard your father talk about investment often enough," she said, more gently. "About Cavendish, about you."
He gave a short laugh without humor.
"Too often," he said, "at home, in letters, in the head's office, if Cavendish goes to Hartley, the name Whitby stops being an investment."
"Exactly," she said. "Now imagine the same conversation with Arthur instead of Matthew. Swap scholarship for First Whitby on the donors board. Swap Rose Hartley for Julian Hartley. It's not another planet, Matt. It's the same play, different act."
They were silent a while. Matt leaned back against a pew, suddenly seeming too tired to stand straight.
"He sent us here, you know," he said eventually, staring at the crucifix. "The headmaster?" she asked.
"He did," Matt said. "Llewellyn and the others are the wallpaper. He knows exactly what lies in these cupboards and under these boards. You really think in 20 years no one noticed that plank?" She remembered his words in the office. "Some places in this school need airing out, Miss Hartley. See that you don't miss any corners."
"He sent us to drag this out," Matt went on, his voice trembling in a dangerous rhythm between laughter and a sob. "He wants to destroy them, Rose. My parents, my uncle, all of them who pretended not to know. And us, we're just ammunition." He laughed. This time it dissolved quickly into something closer to a cough. "Perfect arrangement," he said. "Hartley and Whitby in a chapel, leaning over someone else's letter and deciding something has to be done. The head doesn't have to touch a thing. He hands you a bucket and says, 'Don't miss any corners.'" Rose looked at him and saw at once the boy in the lectern discoursing on fallen dynasties and the boy who had just realized his surname had meant the same thing for 2 generations, Tool. She could have gone in for the kill, said, "Good that you finally see it. Your family has blood on its hands. Now you understand why no one can trust you." Instead, she reached out and laid her hand on his shoulder. The tension in the muscles beneath the blazer was almost tangible. "You're not ammunition," she said, sounding calmer than she felt, "or evidence. You don't have to be."
He stared at her.
"Seriously?" he snapped. "After everything you've just said about my family?"
"Your family is one thing," she said. "You're another. The head is counting on you, not seeing the difference. That way you're easier to move." She tightened her grip a fraction. "You can hand him exactly what he wants," she went on. "Blow up, hurl yourself headfirst into this story, burn it all down. Or you can stand to one side for a second and ask what you want to do with it. Not your name, not his revenge. You." He laughed again, but this time there was no edge to it. More like someone who'd just heard a word no one had used about him in a while. "You really think we have any choice here?" he said. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I do know that if we do nothing, someone will write another neat file with Hartley and Whitby next to the word tragedy, and truth will still be in the margin. The case lay between them like a sentence too heavy to parse." Matt scrubbed a hand over his face. His eyes were red, but dry. "So what?" he asked quietly. "We're meant to be his investigators, his executioners, his special sacrifices?" For now, she said, we can start by being the one thing this story has never had.
What? He said. Witnesses, she said. The ones who say what they saw, not just sign off on someone else's report.
They sat for a while in silence, shoulder to shoulder, like two pupils kept behind after class for failing the same essential test.
Wind hissed at the windows. The old wood creaked as if the building shifted on its foundations.
St. Oswald's loved making people repeat the same lessons. Maybe, for the first time since 1976, someone had the chance to try a different answer.